Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving into something absolutely massive, a proposed $1.5 trillion US defense budget. Now, this isn't just some dry ledger of numbers. It's a gigantic blueprint for military strategy, global power dynamics, and domestic weapons production. We're going to break down exactly what's packed inside this trillion-dollar proposal. And as you'll see, we're going to uncover some pretty shocking disparities between funding shiny next-generation bombers and supporting the actual troops on the ground. So let's just stick to the data, the testimony, and the strategic arguments right from Capitol Hill to figure out what this whole thing really means for the future. Okay, here's our roadmap for today. First, we'll look at the $1.5 trillion budget as a whole. Second, funding global power status. Third, the push for weapons production. And finally, reforming military housing. Let's get into it. Section 1. The $1.5 trillion budget. A macro view. So, the big headline figure here is $1.5 trillion. But to really wrap our heads around this, you have to realize this budget isn't just about buying hardware. It's deeply, deeply tied to human capital and the realities of military recruitment. Built right into this staggering framework is a plan to grow the total force by about 44,000 personnel. Now, growing the force by that much, that's a massive undertaking, right? Especially when you think about the well-documented recruiting struggles we've seen across the branches lately. So, to actually make that growth happen in a super competitive civilian job market, the budget includes a targeted 5.8% military pay raise, set to kick in on January 1st of next year. That pay raise is basically a direct lever to attract and keep talent. So, right out of the gate, before a single piece of new gear is even bought, we're seeing a heavy investment in expanding and compensating the all-volunteer force. Let's break these numbers down a bit further. The proposal basically splits into two main buckets. You've got $1.15 trillion in discretionary spending and $350 billion in mandatory reconciliation. But what is truly wild here is the year-over-year jump. This request represents a massive 44% increase from last year's budget. Just think about the scale of that for a second. A 44% jump on a budget that's already this huge, that's historic. It's way beyond just keeping pace with inflation. It really reflects a fundamental shift in how leadership is evaluating military readiness and international threats. It signals this underlying assumption that today's global security environment just straight up requires a drastically larger financial commitment than anything we've seen in recent memory. Now, naturally, physical hardware takes the lion's share of this funding. A huge chunk is dedicated to dominating the skies and the seas, and the sheer scale of the industrial output here is staggering. We're talking $102 billion specifically for aircraft procurement and RNAMP.D, including buying 85 F-35 fighter jets and 6 B-21 stealth bombers. There's also a dedicated $75 billion just for drones and counter-drone tech. Moving to the naval front, $65 billion is slated for 18 Navy warships and 16 support ships, which is part of an initiative dubbed the Golden Fleet. And $18 billion is carved out for the Golden Dome missile defense system. These aren't just line items on a spreadsheet. They represent years of complex manufacturing and a massive mobilization of the domestic defense industry. Moving right along to Section 2, funding global power status and the strategic shift. The core argument driving this philosophy comes down to a percentage of GDP. Right now, the US is spending roughly 3.2% of its economy on the military. Lawmakers pushing for this budget argue that this is historically very low for a country trying to maintain superpower status. The goal is to push that spending up to near 5% of GDP. Moving from 3.2 to 5% represents a shift of hundreds of billions of dollars and has major implications for taxpayer allocation. The rationale is also tied to NATO expectations, where the US has urged allies to meet a 5% threshold. Proponents argue the US must meet its own benchmark to maintain credibility and global leadership. The argument continues that you cannot effectively deter threats in a volatile world while staying at 3.2%. The 5% target is seen as necessary to fund major modernization efforts simultaneously, including overhauling the nuclear triad of land-based missiles, submarines, and strategic bombers. On top of that, the budget aims to field next-generation technologies, like sixth-generation fighters, and expand naval capabilities like the Golden Fleet. Maintaining technological superiority across all domains requires investment far beyond current levels. This brings us to the push for weapons production and the hardware reality. A key statement from Representative Don Bacon captures the urgency. "We are shooting in one day what we're building in a month." This highlights a serious mismatch between how quickly munitions are being used in modern conflicts and how slowly they are being replenished. Current peacetime production levels are not sufficient for today's geopolitical environment. Critical systems like Patriot interceptors and advanced missiles are being depleted faster than they can be replaced. The goal of this funding is to rapidly expand production lines and shift the defense industrial base from peacetime output to wartime readiness. This requires more than funding. It involves restructuring factories, securing supply chains, and shifting economic priorities to sustain both domestic stockpiles and allied support. Finally, we get to housing reform and the human element. A key issue is a $2.9 billion housing allowance and where that money actually goes. Despite the massive overall budget, this smaller allocation has become the focus of scrutiny regarding troop support. Congress intended the funds to provide targeted relief in high-cost areas like San Diego, Virginia, and Washington, D.C. However, the Pentagon distributed the money as a broad bonus across all personnel, which diluted the intended impact. As a result, service members in high-cost areas continue to struggle. The consequences are significant. Housing allowances often do not match actual rent, forcing some active duty personnel to rely on food assistance programs. At the same time, a policy deducts 5% from housing allowances to fund weapons procurement. Even though Congress has allowed this deduction to stop, it continues, further straining service members financially. This creates a striking contradiction within the budget. Massive investments are being made in advance. This leads to a central question: does a $1.5 trillion budget guarantee superpower status? If foundational elements like production capacity and troop welfare are under strain, weapons and global power projection, while production systems struggle to keep up and troops face basic financial hardships. Thanks for joining this explainer. Keep questioning the numbers behind the headlines